My name is Jessie Ace. I'm part of a group of ENabled Warriors that you've probably never heard of. We're fighting back against our invisible illness and taking the dis out of disability. We don't give sympathy to our symptoms. They enable us to be the warrior that we are. If you ask doctors and nurses, they'd say what we're doing is impossible. But pushing the limits of our conditions is something that we have to break through every single day. See, we push the limits. We are mentally strong, and we can do anything. The question is, how far can we push those limits? This podcast will give you the answers. I'm Jessie Ace, and this is the Disabled to Enabled podcast. Enabled Warriors, welcome back to part 2 of our interview with today's guest. We've just spoken about their diagnosis. If you missed it, make sure to go back and have a listen. In this section, we'll have a chat about the amazing things that today's guest has done since their diagnosis. So hey, and welcome back. Okay, so you have 8 children. 6 of them were adopted, 4 of them are on the autism scale. Why did you decide to have so many of them, and how do you manage 8 children? Because I have a dog, and that takes up so much of my time.
Well, I wanted 12.
Wow.
So I feel like I didn't quite. Actually, I co-parented 4 of my grandchildren, so I guess I ended up really with 12. I ended up with that many kids because I was driven to try and make a difference in the world, and adoption was normal for me. My father was adopted, my brother was adopted. Adoption was kind of a normal path. So it unfolded in this way. I didn't really set out to do anything other than try to make children's lives easier, and that's really been true of me all along. I forget the second part of your question, though. Oh, the dog. How did I manage it?
Yeah. That's the important part.
Here's what's really interesting. My daughter and I talk about this all the time. So when I had one child, it was easy. And I just, doted on them, like having one pet. But then I had 2 children, and I kept walking around going, how is it so much harder? It's not just twice as hard. It's 1,000,000 times as hard. And then every additional child was just the same. There was not extra. Once you learn to divide your attention, it's just about being busy. It wasn't harder. But boy, going from 1 to 2 was really, really, really surprisingly
It was a shock, huh?
Yeah, it was a huge shock. But going from 2 to 3, from 4 to 6, it wasn't.
No.
So it's a skill, dividing yourself up like that, and understanding that you can't give everything to one child. That's a hard lesson. Your heart breaks when, true story, one wins the baton contest and one gets loser buttons, right? And your heart breaks, right? But then once you know how to do that, it's just more multiplication. It's fine. Or factoring in at a bigger, you just take a spoonful of food off everyone's plate. Now you can feed another person, right? So it wasn't.
That's a really good way to look at it.
But busy. Yes. Yeah. And my focus issues love busy. So it worked for me.
So that does work with your condition as well. That's amazing. So how old were your children when you adopted them?
Everything from the oldest child that was adopted was 14, the youngest was 1.5. So there was a real range of ages. The 2 girls were actually runaways from their home. I had a lot of runaways come into my home, about 9, and I sent most of them back to their parents once they settled out their argument. But there was 2 that I went, well, they can't go back, and and I actually got legal guardianship because of their ages and stuff. It wasn't a straight up adoption. It was a lot of trouble in court and stuff, but we won.
You got there in the end, so that's the important thing.
Yeah.
So with that being said, do you have any tips for parents who may have children that are kind of on the autism spectrum or have some other sort of condition? Like, how can those parents help kind of manage?
Well, I mean, my most prominent advice is what I already said about it if it's for yourself. It's the same with your child. There are a lot of myths about this stuff, and they're created by the way that we train and instead of teach. So, for example, inflexibility is a good one. Yes, there's a kind of inflexibility in the brain's ability to switch tracks, to go from receptive to expressive and that sort of thing. But to say that a child on the spectrum of autism is inflexible and must have a schedule and will have a meltdown if they don't have that schedule teaches to it and creates a greater degree of inflexibility and more rigidity. So I could say this about each of the myths that are out there, like that I mentioned, not wanting affection, problems with social skills. Yes, there's problems with social skills, but you don't want to teach your child that they don't like people. You want to help them find the way in which they like people. You can be antisocial but still like people, right? You can recuperate as a result of being alone and then regenerate when you're with others. So some people get their energy or re-energized by being with people, and some people get it by being alone. That's just the thing. So really, don't buy the myths. Look at your child like a human being and see where the myths are true and how you can help them to make it less rigidly so. It's really important because otherwise you really do sort of teach to the problem and make it bigger. And then all of a sudden they're teenagers and they're hitting you. So you really want to think about them as human beings, not as a diagnosis that you're going to try to teach away so that someday they're your child. No, they're already your child.
Yeah, I think it's probably hard to kind of remember that, really, I guess.
Well, it is. It is if the therapists and the teachers and the people that you turn to talk like, if only I didn't have this autism, then, then he'd be normal. No, this is who he is.
He's already normal to
right?
him.
This is her. This is him. This is, you can't just think of it like a blanket that was put on the child and you're going to take it off and out it's going to pop this regular person. It's a life challenge and you embrace it as such, but you know that they can improve and maybe move off the spectrum because they've learned their way off.
Huge, yeah, tough, definitely. And I was reading on your website about a travel therapy that you did with your kids where you kind of loaded them up all into a van, I think you said, and then you kind of went and toured around somewhere. Like, tell us about that. That must have been a crazy adventure.
I had 2 adventures in travel therapy. The first one, I didn't call it that yet. It was prison tour talent. I was trying to think, okay, so at the time I was a stand-up comedian and an actress and I had 8 kids and they were all special needs. And I was like, how can I work and raise these kids at the same time? And there was all kinds of problems happening. So my teenagers were thinking it was a time when everyone was making all these TV shows about being in prison, being cool. And they're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to be like the bad girl? And I'm like, no. So I came up with the idea of creating a show for prisons and traveling all over North America with my children and where in the halfway houses and stuff where the younger ones were allowed to be a part of it, they were. And when they weren't allowed, then the kids took turns babysitting while the other ones of us went in and performed. It was quite an experience. And what I learned is that they learned better on the road. And that was a happenstance, right? I was having a lot of problems with the schools and stuff. And I went, oh my gosh, they're like interested in what's happening to themselves and in their life and embracing things a little different. And that sort of stuck in my head for a while. And then later when I had moved us to Texas, from Canada to Texas, I was in the school and I looked around at the IEP teachers and I said, do any of you like my child? Because I could see it and I could hear it and they didn't. And they all kind of averted their gaze. And I don't need to tell you which child that was because he might hear this podcast. But I just said, okay, how do I homeschool? And they said, you just tell us you are. So I said, I am. And I just went and got them all out of school and sold everything I had, put the rest in storage, bought an RV, and started gathering supporters. And we lived in an RV for a year and a half until I could find a country home to let them be wild and crazy in. And caught them up about, well, that particular child couldn't even recognize the CH was ch, and his name starts with that. Or he didn't know the alphabet, he couldn't read. And by the time we finished a year and a half of travel schooling, he could read a book.
Wow.
And he was ready to try to, get his GED, which he did get. So it was fast because it was tangible. So if you want to work with somebody who has a problem with concept, you want to make it tangible. So they learned geography on the road. They read maps. They read signs, things that mattered, not things that were divorced of usefulness in their life.
That makes so much sense, doesn't it? That
Yeah.
should just be a thing,
Oh, it should totally be a thing. And then I did something that was an important piece of this, which was I got these resorts that so we were going from resort to resort to resort. We were off season, so any kids that were at the resort were desperate for a friend. So they would play with my kids, whereas at school they would not.
Right. Okay.
And
Interesting.
right, and it was a secure environment because it was a resort. They couldn't leave the resort, so I could give them freedom, which in a normal neighborhood I could not. So the final piece being people are in a good mood because they're on vacation and they're not thinking, oh, those people that moved in next door are there for life. So they have a better attitude about my kids. So here they are seeing all these holiday smiles, being asked to play games with kids that would normally be their bullies, and given freedom. It was magical, and that should be a thing. That's how you should school your kids.
Definitely. That's amazing. Gosh. And wow, like I want to go into that more, but I know we've kind of got to hurry on with the rest of the interview. So I really want to talk about you as a therapist yourself. So you describe yourself as a neurofeedback therapist. That is amazing. Like you've got so many qualifications. You've done so much. It's just phenomenal. Like, tell us about that kind of stuff.
Well, I was doing the stuff we've been talking about. We'd already done travel therapy, and I noticed that what really motivated this moving to really substantially training in a strong way was I was talking to my daughter. So I was talking to my daughter, and I noticed I couldn't stay focused on her conversation. And that if it wasn't me doing the talking, I wasn't a good listener. And I thought, well, now how am I going to be a good mother if I can't listen to my own child? Now, the boys, it was easy because they were so quirky and weird. They were always challenging, and that kept me alert. But she was too regular. She wanted to talk about boring stuff like shopping, right? I cannot do it. I can't. And I really didn't like that in myself as a mom. And so I've always been mom motivated. And that made me start training to be a counselor where you had to be a good listener. And I thought, well, that'll help my brain. And in that beginning came the rest of the story. So I trained and I became a mentor counselor. Then I went, wow, I need to be better at working with my two sons that aren't getting better, but the other ones are. And so then I trained as a child facilitator. And then I thought, we're still not quite getting there. And I discovered neurofeedback, which is biofeedback for the brain. And all my skills at this point were magnificent for working hands-on with kids, but I needed some way to reach their physiology. And we'd already done diet and all those things. And when I read about biofeedback for the brain, I thought, this sounds like what I'm doing in play therapy, but for the actual brain. It really resonated with me. So I decided I had just got certified. So I went, okay, thank you very much. I'm off to learn something else. And I did it on myself and I did it on my son. And all of a sudden I had focus. And my son started to do things that he hadn't done before. And could handle sensory input that he couldn't handle before. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think I'm about to train in this. So then I started doing that and backed into the higher level education by going, gee, I've learned so much. I need people to listen to me. So I better go to school and get some letters. And it just sort of went that way. It was really always the mom trying to fix herself to fix her kids, fix kids to fix herself, fix herself to fix her kids, right? So it just kept going back and forth like that.
That's amazing. So what actually is neurofeedback? Because that blows my mind.
Yeah, well, you look at the EEG, so you put sensors on a person's head and you're looking at their electroencephalogram and seeing how their brain waves are functioning. It's a different way of looking at the EEG, though, than, say, someone who's just looking for a seizure disorder.
Mm.
You're looking for where the balance is not as it should be in a neurotypical brain. So, for example, just a simple thing would be maybe over in the temporal lobe here, for those who can't see anything, just around your ear, just above your ear. Let's say I saw a lot of high frequency brainwave activity, I would know that that was creating anxiety and different functioning problems. So then I would put into my computer reward lower frequency brainwaves and inhibit higher frequency. Now, that isn't forced change on the brain, it's a teaching model. So you teach the brain to teach itself to be different. It's really lovely.
Okay.
So the feedback system is that we see it, we say what needs to change, and then they play a game with focus and with shifting. And the brain is meant for this sort of thing. It always changes according to environmental stimuli. So when it gets this reward tone in the game, it goes, oh, that's how you do it. And it changes itself. And I love that because I don't like the idea of being intrusive and using medicine or surgery or things like that, or electricity or radio waves. So it's basically telling the brain what to do, and then the brain does it.
Yeah. So the in effect, we can actually manage our own kind of brainwaves and our
In
conditions.
effect, you always are. As a matter of fact, you can't help it.
That's amazing.
That's why you want to be careful what you believe. Right?
Mm.
That's why when you embrace a diagnosis and then say over and over again, you're something, your brain goes, oh, I am? Okay. And it builds that stronger.
Yes, and
So,
I'll tell you something. Sorry, something else that people say as well is that I'm suffering with this,
yes,
and that
yes,
drives
all
me
that.
insane.
Yes, you're
Mm.
suffering with it, so you'll suffer with it.
Exactly.
I'm, let's say I have a pain, just a physical pain in my back. If I say I'm suffering with that pain, I continually sort of move differently because of it and I create new pains.
Yep.
But additionally, I tell my brain, yeah, let's not address the pain gate theory here. Let's go for the pain. And there are pain signals in your brain. There are certain brain waves that only happen as a result of pain. And here's a better way of explaining it. If I'm looking at your EEG and you are experiencing pain at around on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the horrible and 1 is none, you're having about a 4. If you're a guy and your wife walks in and goes, "Oh, honey, are you having a sore back?" Guess what? There's this particular brain wave that only comes when that happens, and it multiplies by 3 times your level of pain, and you'll be way up at an 8 or 9. And that was that reintroducing of focus on the pain and that feeling of, oh, it's inescapable and misery, and you just feel it. So yeah, it's important, and you always are.
That's amazing. So is there something that we can consciously do to be altering these kind of brainwaves and these kind of results that we're getting?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I think what happens to people is they try to embrace positive thinking. They hear about it. They stand and they look in their mirror and go, I am beautiful, or I am strong, or whatever it is.
Hmm.
But they don't believe it.
Yeah.
And your brain hears the whole thing. It hears you not believe it too, so it's not going to work. Um, and the reason they don't believe it is they don't understand the brain. So if you come to understand this physiological reality about your brain and how it builds itself and what plasticity really means, and if you look for incongruencies in your belief system, then you'll be able to help yourself. So, for example, if I say, no, I've always been pretty. People have always found me pretty. Um, and then I'm talking to someone, I say, oh, well, I'm not pretty enough for that. That's an incongruency. Which one is it? So we could talk about looks. We can talk about, intelligence. We can talk about whatever affects your self-esteem. But when you have two beliefs that go against each other, you create stress. And you can't get the positive one because the stress is negative. But if you
Exactly.
can look for those incongruencies and embrace it and understand that you'll actually build a different situation in your brain, it's actually physical, then you might embrace it differently. So
Yeah.
learn about the brain, I guess.
It's true. It's so true, and quite often that people are held back by these negative false beliefs that they've had that have kind of manifested over a certain amount of time, growing up more quite like significantly, and then they kind of grow up with this idea, and then that's sort of still lingering in the background whilst they're trying to, trying to improve in other ways, but they're never actually going to get over it because they've not dealt with this thing in the background. So
Well,
yeah,
and it creates how you see the world and the world that you bring to you, right? So,
1,000,000%.
for example, I was raised, there was a lot of abuse, and one of the things I heard all the time was, okay, so mom called me horrible things,
Okay.
um, like a whore, things like that, right?
Mm.
And I was a child. Obviously, it wasn't any of that, right? I was a child. But that creates a vision of the world and a behavior in the world that brings that same world back to you. So now all the world does is prove that this is correct, right? So
Yeah.
how do you go from believing something that the world is proving is correct to believing something else that you have no evidence for?
Mm.
That's why we reach for experts, people with a different vision, with a different perspective. That's why you want to go and read a book about brain function, not diagnoses. Goodness gracious, if you read the DSM-5 and read diagnoses, you'll have every brain disease. But if you read about function, structure, function, or if you go to a psychiatrist and say, am I? And I'm like, no, you're not a thing. You're not a whore, you're just a woman. And because you believe something, you're only responding to certain things and seeing it. And then you need someone else's perspective to come in and bring you this other reality. Otherwise, you can't see it. And so you can't believe away. You have to believe away from what you're believing. And that's really challenging.
That is so true. Yeah. So true. And yeah, so before we go into part 3, can you tell us a little bit more about the docuseries that you've been doing?
Oh, I love my docuseries. So it's taking me forever, by the way. But I do have 2 seasons up, and I'm almost through the 3rd season, and there'll be 5 seasons. It's called 6 and 5, and because, well, I was traveling all over the world working with all different disabilities, but especially specializing in autism. And there were some things that always worked, regardless of culture, regardless of, you know, diet, regardless of religion, regardless of location, regardless of age. And I wanted the world to get that. And one thing I know is that, we say that we believe in evidence-based medicine and then we act like we don't, and vice versa. So I thought if I take cameras with me to work, and since I used to be an actress and stuff, I'm comfortable with cameras and I know people, um, maybe I can show it, maybe I can prove it. And that was how it began. And so I did a season in Uganda, a season in America, a season in Israel. I'm still editing Israel. Um, and you see me working with people and their whole families because I work with entire environments. And so the young girl in Uganda goes from nobody can understand her to speaking well at the end. The boy who has tempered and violent outbursts in America goes from outburst to not having outbursts, and then we raise the bar and he has another outburst, and that's the end of the show. So I mean, it's nothing is smooth, right? Life isn't smooth,
No.
and I'm trying to show that improvement is improvement, but that this this make believe fantasy that we have that erases the amount of challenge that parents face is a problem because it's a lot of work, but it's doable. You
Mm.
have to know that. And the only way to know that is to see it. Sort of like what we were just saying. You're blind otherwise. So if everyone tells you it can't be done, you just don't see that it can be done. If everyone tells you that there can be a miracle here, you keep praying for the miracle and your child's 40. So you want that interim step where you go, okay, this is where we're at scientifically right now. This is what we know how to do. Let's gather all that knowledge and find out, how do I be a good parent here? And how do I really help my child improve? And what are the things that will always work? And so that's what I'm trying to bring to the eye and mind of the parent who's coping with it now.
I love that. That's amazing. So how can people access that? How can they go and watch that?
Well, I just started putting it on YouTube. It was only on the autism channel, but because of the present situation with everyone at home, I decided to make it available to everyone. So it's on YouTube. The first season's fully on. The second season will be fully on in a couple days. They can just go to my YouTube channel, or they can put in Fix It in 5, Lynette Louise, and it'll come up. You can go to my website. You can LynetteLouise.com or brainbody.net. You can go on my Facebook page. I'm posting all the time. But really, I mean, it's all on the YouTube channel. It's also on Vimeo and the autism channel. So there are a few places.
Oops. Oh my goodness. You're just everywhere. It's amazing.
Well, the Vimeo is special because that's how I try to raise money to edit. So it's free. But if you go to Vimeo, you rent it or buy it. And that's the people who want to contribute. And they say to me, why don't you have a donation page? And I'm like, well, go rent my show. You know, I don't want to get all focused on trying to make money off it. But at the same time, I want to have a place where people can contribute if they want to.
Yeah, totally. That's amazing. And I'll definitely add all those links into the show notes for sure. Thank you so much.
Good.
So is there anything else that you want to discuss before we head into part 3?
Well, these are all my books, but let me pull this one because we've been talking a lot about autism. So for parents who prefer to read, I wrote this quite some time ago, but it's still really good information inside. And it's a broad-based book. It's called Miracles Are Made, and I do case studies and stuff in there. But why I really like that book is it fills a space that nobody's filled, which is really just to tell you the story and the dangers and what's possible. And so all the stuff we've been talking about is presented in much more detail and way more well-written than I can speak. So it's a really good sort of moms just entering the world of autism going, how do I figure out what's true and what isn't, what therapy to embrace and what's just people targeting us for money. And I think it's a good book for that.
That is amazing advice. Thank you so much for sharing such amazing advice with us. ENabled Warriors, please join us again in part 3 to catch the final bit of our interview with today's guest. Super quick secrets round coming up. Remember, if you've been affected by any of the issues raised in this episode, then please leave a comment and let us know what it is. And subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss out on great stories. And remember, warriors, stay enabled. If you have a chronic illness, you'll know that symptoms can be so annoying. Whether you're trying to figure out what symptom is for what condition or trying to figure out what is triggering your symptoms, the ENabled Warrior Symptom Tracker can help. It's a book that I've developed alongside doctors and other patients, or as I like to say, warriors, to make it as easy as possible for you to track your symptoms, and it's easy for doctors to glance at and give you the best care possible. Take a look at the show notes right now to see where you can get yours. Warriors listening, if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to win $100, leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tell us what you liked best. We'll choose one review at random each month to win $100, and after you've left your review, remember, go and click that subscribe button. Are you ready to fight back against your chronic illness and go from being disabled to enabled? Do you want to be an enabled warrior, someone who's brave, strong, and confident, and someone who's ready to find a way to achieve awesome things despite a diagnosis? This is your invitation. Check out disabled2enabled.com for articles and reviews to find out how you can become enabled too. Subscribe to the podcast to always be in the know. If you think this podcast is better than sleeping in on a Sunday, tickle that subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening. And make sure to share this episode with someone who needs some inspiration. Want to ask your questions to future guests? Make sure to join our ENabled Warriors tribe on Facebook and look out for our question posts. Before we go, check out Disabled2Enabled on Instagram for posts that tell it like it is. And remember, warriors, stay enabled.